questions to consider before starting TRT. These are ones that I would say, if you're not with me, which majority of you do not work with me, majority of y'all watching this, y'all are like, by definition, y'all are audience members, y'all are listeners, viewers, but y'all are not clients. Y'all have not worked with me on a one-on-one basis. So these are questions I want you, like, they're going to be in the timestamp, so don't freak out. I want you to take to your provider or your coach or whoever the fuck is prescribing, maybe not your drug dealer, but like, I want you to take to the person who is giving you the recommendation to start TRT. And I want you to just ask some of these things. I just want you, and it's not to be like, it's not a gotcha thing. Recently, there was a study that was done for like a secret shopper, like basically went to a lot of telehealth clinics. And this is like featured on the Gillette Health podcast, which they do a lot of really, really good, a lot of sound information there as well. So if you're interested in even more information on female endocrinology or male endocrinology, check them out as well. But that's where I heard this from. This is why I'm bringing this up about the secret shopper study relative to clinics and like what was the experience generally once people went to clinics seeking TRT. Now, I can tell you anecdotally in my experience, there's been a lot of individuals who've come to me who have been, I don't even want to say like misled, but they've just been neglected, like as clients, as patients. And that's really like my purpose with putting this out. This is not medical advice. Nothing I say is ever medical advice. I'm just someone on the internet talking to myself for many hours of the day, and then it gets recorded and uploaded to the internet and y'all tune into it. These are the questions that you need to consider, that you should be asking. And even if like you're like, I don't really feel comfortable asking my coach who I've worked with for 3 weeks, well then just ask yourself, like use this as like a little journaling technique, like whatever you want to do. What are some signs and symptoms of low testosterone? How can I tell if I might be experiencing them? This is one of the most common questions that I get. It just generally, hey, is this something that I'm experiencing that I wouldn't recognize? Now, common symptoms include low fatigue, decreased strength, reduced bone density, which like that you would need to get like really technical with. Like you could use the DEXA, yes, but like reduced libido, generally some kind of like dysfunction or decrease in cognitive sharpness. I don't want to say cognitive decline because I think that's a bit of a stretch. But I think really the feelings of low testosterone just are generally feelings of not being well across the board, seeing a decrease from whatever your baseline is in terms of recovery, strength, performance, sexual function. These symptoms are subtle and they can overlap, which is why it's really important when you work with a provider, when you work with a coach, to have a very comprehensive evaluation. The reality is I think a lot of people live in states where they've normalized states of suppression, of suppressed testosterone. But I think it's something that when you understand like, okay, this is generally how I should feel, and this is how I feel at levels that are adequate, that are normal, it can be easier. I don't want to say it's pretty easy. It can be easier to then pinpoint, okay, this is what low test feels like. Candidates. Really, when it comes to determining, are you a good candidate for TRT? There's two approaches I take with this. There's the individual who it's indicated for, who they truly do need TRT because their levels are suppressed. And I would say this is more aligned, like this avatar of a person is someone who I'm like, okay, realistically, you're not going to regain natural function. Like you are biologically maybe at an age or approaching an age that would suggest that it's gonna get worse. Like you're on it. Now the interesting part to this is like I predominantly work with people in and adjacent to physique sports, the bodybuilding space. I don't largely work with competitors. I have some competitors, but that's not my primary demographic. I work with a lot of people who like competing and who are like, I'm transitioning out of it and I still want to be a competitor, but just not really like do the stage thing. Like I still want to bodybuild. I want to live the lifestyle. And I love that. Typically for the individual who's like, I am at the point where I'm going to take drugs, or maybe them and we decide that it makes sense for them to take drugs. Okay, well, maybe in that case, we can like peel back these layers of like what needs to happen in order for them to be safe while they're taking drugs. Well, these drugs, a lot of the androgenic, well, really exclusively all the androgenic ones, the anabolic androgenic steroids, they will have suppressive effects on your sex hormones, which ultimately that's going to cause suppression of your testosterone levels. Now, the reason that I'm such a big advocate for like, if you're going to use anabolics, you should have some testosterone coverage in place is because the exposure to these anabolics, that is already, I would say, high risk for someone who does not want to incur androgenic side effects. So if you are someone who's like, hey, I want to be as safe as possible with the inclusion of anabolics, how do I go about that? My primary starting point is going to be like, let's evaluate your test levels, because if there's any indication that you are already suppressed, or let's say potentially you're going into a state where we're going to encourage suppression, like we are going to encourage it, it could make sense to have it in temporarily. It's not a lifelong commitment. It's not something that you have to necessarily be on. And I'm going to get into that later in this video. But blanketly, like the easiest answer, the simplest answer, shortest answer that, I know you guys are hunting for, if you have levels that are too low and you are in a state where you cannot recover those levels, that is my blanket statement. So what levels are too low? I mean, like the girl I spoke with this morning, who I'm like, I don't think you should start TRT or HRT. There's a few reasons to this specifically. And like, I think sometimes it can be seen as like, well, you just don't want me to take drugs. It's like, no, like you have non-pharmacological levers that we can pull on first that honestly will give us more insight into how you're going to respond to testosterone. And also, I don't even know if you need it. Like, what if we corrected these levels? Like, what if we pulled on these levels and that in turn corrected some of your test levels? That has happened. And specifically for people who, like in some cases who have struggled with weight loss and like just generally live like a higher stress life. Like I've seen it happen where they think like, okay, the low test is their normal. But once we start digging into just how they live their life, like we're able to recoup some of their normal levels naturally. And it's not something that I like pitch for a lot of people, specifically those who do plan to use drugs, plan to use anabolics, because I'm like, well, if you're going to use them anyway, like we're going to see those levels come down. So even if we recoup these naturally, it's like, it's not going to do a lot once the drugs go in place. And if you're going to keep them for a long period of time, or you're going to do that in combination with being in a state that's not going to allow you to sustain normal to normal high testosterone levels, then it doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, in the case of someone who, goes into a clinic, who goes to do like, lab work with their provider, like a traditional, like primary, what you're going to see is that testosterone at times can be prescribed for low libido, fatigue, in conjunction with low serum levels. Anecdotally, I'll say that I see a lot of people getting testosterone when they are complaining, and rightfully so, like these are real complaints, real symptoms they're experiencing of low energy, low recoverability, low performance, and I see there being a little bit of a bias and like kind of like some body shaming that occurs if you are generally fit and healthy and athletic and younger. Like I am 29 years old. I've been on TRT for almost 3 years. So it'll be 3 years in December. I have never had an OB or doctor be on board with me being on TRT. And I've laid out like the evidence, like I've been like, here's my rationale, here's what I'm trying to do, and here's what I'm trying to do and compete in bodybuilding. And here's where my levels were previously at states in which like this was pretty much as high as they were going to get. And they've been this way for, almost the better part of a decade. So realistically, they're not getting better. I think a lot of traditional providers are a little more conservative with prescribing TRT. I don't think that this sector of medicine is really where it needs to be to offer support to women who are going through reproductive challenges, specific to like hormonal balance and hormonal maintenance, not necessarily fertility. TRT in the clinical setting is considered beneficial for women who are diagnosed with hypoactive sexual disorder. Now, particularly if traditional hormone replacement has not been effective. And, I put a little bit of an asterisk there because there isn't a standard best practice for HRT outside of TRT specific to the physique athlete. That's not something that a lot of providers recognize as standard or effective intervention. It is something that you'll see a lot of businesses, like a lot of private sectors, a lot of private clinics, spas will take to because they are financially motivated. Now, in terms of just like evaluating your candidacy, I know I'm fucking that word up. Sorry. Lab test. Yes. We want to also look at your free test. We also want to look at your history as to, just generally what could be the underlying cause for the low testosterone. And I think all this needs to happen, and it is essential prior to startment of TRT. Now, what I will say is I do have a lot of clients who come to me who are very gung-ho on like, I'm doing Anavar. Like, I will do it, Corey. I'm going to do it with or without you. Me and my coach are already doing it. What can I do? help make this better. And in that case, for the client who literally comes to me is like, I'm already going to do drugs. Like, that's the decision I've made. It is not my prerogative to like tell you that's okay or it's not okay. I can give my input, and I don't even want to call it advice or recommendation, but like I can give, what I believe to be the best approach to using these things, what I would do if it were me, based on my beliefs, and then obviously based on what's important to you and what you prioritize, relative to what risk you're willing to incur.